Well, welcome everybody to Downtown Harbor Church. If it is your first time here, my name is John. I'm the lead pastor. Appreciate you guys coming on out. Today we are in week 3 of our series on Daniel, where we are looking at the various times that Daniel, this big, huge figure of the Old Testament, took a stand for God, okay? And our goal throughout this series is to find out what it looks like for us to take a stand for the right things at the right time in the right way. So today what I want to do is I want to have a chat about what it looks like for us to stand strong in the face of opposition. Okay, what it looks like for us to stand strong when we find ourselves in a situation where people or perhaps even forces are coming against you. Now, to frame this conversation, I want to look at perhaps what is one of the greatest stories in the entire Bible, okay? Today's story is the story that lands Daniel into what I often call the Sunday School Hall of Fame, right? This is the story that we love to teach kids. And it's one of these stories where even if you're not a Christian, okay, and you're not really a church person, there's a pretty good chance you've at least heard of this story in passing. And of course, I'm speaking about Daniel and the lion's den. Top 5 stories in the Bible, right? You know, you got like Noah's Ark, you got Jonah and the whale, and you got Daniel and the lion's den. Here's the problem with this story, though. For those of us who grew up in the church, and many of us did, for those of us who went to Sunday school as a child or kids' church, we tend to view this story sort of through the lens of a child. This is kind of how we were taught it. It's kind of how we remember it. Daniel's a brave little boy, and the lions are snuggly at bed. You know, okay. So here's the thing. The reality of this story is much different, okay? Today's lions are not, trained to go through, hoops by Siegfried and Roy, okay? The truth is these lions were probably starved and beaten so that they would attack humans on sight. Secondly, Daniel, for as much as we think, it isn't some cute little boy in this story. At this time, he's about 80 years old, okay? So today is really about an elderly man taking a stand for God and putting his faith and, quite frankly, his life on the line. So let's jump in and just see what we see. Before we do that, I just want to introduce you to a guy named Darius the Mede. So for the last 2 weeks, if you've been here, you'll remember that Daniel has been dealing with King Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonian Empire. Since last week's story, 40 years have passed by. The Babylonian Empire has been conquered. It's a little more than that, but just say that. They've been conquered. Nebuchadnezzar's out. There's a new king in town. That is Darius the Mede. So we're going to start in chapter 6, verse 1. Darius the Mede, the new king, decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces, and he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. So historians will tell us that Darius was actually a phenomenally gifted leader, really, really good. He was excellent with administration and these leadership things, and you see that here. Okay, so he creates all these various leadership roles around the kingdom. It goes on. The king also chose Daniel and 2 others as administrators to supervise the high officers and to protect the king's interest. And in this role, Daniel and these 2 other guys, their job would be to protect against rebellion, to levy taxes, and really to sort of guard and manage the finances of this empire. And like everything else that Daniel did, he put all of his heart into this job. It says that Daniel soon proved himself more capable than the other administrators and high officers. So he's now distinguishing himself, right? He's standing out. He's serving with excellence. He's going above and beyond. He's going the extra mile. As we would say in the New Testament, he's working as unto the Lord. King Darius takes note of this. He sees this. He sees that Daniel is head and shoulders above the other guys. And because of this, Daniel's great ability, it says, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Let's pause. That is quite a promotion. Daniel is now second in command in this empire. He is effectively the prime minister. He went from being a prisoner of war in week 1 to now he's leading the country. So this is a big promotion, but it would become a big problem. As my Nana would often say, get those happy shoes off, right? Just like, not so fast. Here's the problem. The problem is the other 2 administrators, the ones who didn't get that promotion, they're none too pleased. They're angry. They're jealous. And in their jealousy, they plot to take down Daniel. And one of the unfortunate truths we learn sort of right out of the gate with this story is that when God raises you up, expect others to tear you down. When God begins to bless you and move in your life, just expect others to take. Maybe you've experienced this in your own life. You got that promotion that you just worked really, really hard for. You got it. And it's the strangest thing, though. Your coworkers, right? People you thought would be happy for you, they're now your biggest critics. Or you're a student and you worked hard and you made it onto honor roll. You got into that reach school. But the people that you thought would be happy for you, they're now like hating on you. Psychologists actually have a term for this behavior. They call it the crab syndrome or the crab mentality. I don't know if you've ever gone crabbing before. It's a big thing to do in New Jersey. When you catch these crabs, you throw them into a bucket or a bushel. Okay? And when one inevitably tries to escape out the top, not a problem because the other crabs grab them and pull them back down. Every time, without fail. It's this idea of if I can't have it, neither can you. Psychologists say that this behavior extends into human beings as well, the crab syndrome. People will attempt to reduce the self-confidence of any other person who achieves success beyond the others. And they do this out of envy or out of jealousy or resentment or spite in order to halt that person's progress. Now, at a very early age, my dad wanted me to know this truth because it's out there. And the way that he explained it to me, he goes, John, here's the deal. Personal success rarely makes others joyful. When you do well, okay, be it in your career or your finances or your studies, whatever, okay? When you do well, he said, outside of your parents, okay, and your nearest and dearest, very few people will be genuinely happy for you. Now, you can call that cynical. Maybe we experience that more because we're in New Jersey. But based on what I see, okay, in society, in media, on social media, and in Scripture, that's just human nature. So what do we do with that uncomfortable truth? Now, this has nothing to do with Daniel, but I have to just round out this teaching or I'll be thinking about it forever. Number one, we don't look to others for validation. Because if you live for their applause, you will die by their rejection. We only look to God. Secondly, and this one's a tough pill to swallow, we need to be wise about our success. Knowing the unfortunate effect that it can have on people, we just want to make sure that we remain humble and never self-promote. And that's hard because a part of us that says, well, if my success bothers them, that's their problem. Yeah, technically you're right, but good luck with that. So Daniel is firmly the victim of this crab syndrome. People are seeing God move and work in his life, and he's advancing in his career, and they're not happy. And so they plot to take him down. Take a look. Then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way that Daniel was handling government affairs. But they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. This sounds like something you'd see on the news. This sounds like American politics, doesn't it? They want Daniel out of office. And so they dig for dirt. And they look through his Twitter feed, 15 years ago to see if he said anything. They're looking for skeletons in his closet. They can't find anything. Guy is squeaky clean. So they try a different tactic. It says he was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. So they concluded, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. This is so devious. They can't find any dirt in this guy, so they're going to use his faith against him, which really dispels this common myth that a lot of Christians hold on to. And that is, if I'm faithful to God, my life will be problem-free. If I'm serving the Lord, then I shouldn't face any kind of opposition. If I'm following after Jesus, life should be easy. I mean, if I'm trying to do what's right, then people really shouldn't be coming against me. Scripture makes it clear. This is a fallacy. It's a misconception. It's just not the case. Why? Well, because when you commit to living for God, the enemy will push back. We see this all the time in Scripture. When you make a commitment to stand out for God, when you make a commitment to stand up for what is right, to stand strong for God, you can and should expect resistance because you're now a threat to the enemy. You're no longer just sitting on the sidelines. You're in the game. You're making a difference in this world for Jesus, okay? But the pushback you get shouldn't scare you. In fact, it should encourage you and embolden you, letting you know that you are, in fact, on the right track. So the enemy is going to use Daniel's faith against him. It says this. So the administrators and high officers went to the king and said, give orders that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions. So Darius is like many other kings. They are vulnerable to pride. And these kings back then often tried to deify themselves. Now, it wasn't that they thought they were gods. They just loved being treated as though they were one. So Darius hears this new law, and he's like, love this. I want 14 more just like it, okay? And so they make prayer to any other god illegal. That's a massive problem for Daniel. So Daniel is a man of prayer, and as I was reading it this week, it just got me wondering. And I'll ask you sort of the same question I asked myself. Here it is. How would you fare against a no prayer law? Government passes a law. You cannot pray to Jesus for 30 days. How does that affect you? Do people that know you read about this new law in a newspaper and immediately think of you because they know how important prayer is to you and in your life? Maybe this law has no effect on you. Maybe even though you're a Christian, prayer is just not something I really do. So Daniel, this 80-year-old man with the threat of death by lions hanging over his head, has a decision to make. What's he going to do? Well, number one, he could just stop praying, right? Just stop praying. Hey, God, listen, we've been doing this for about 80 years. I'm just going to take a couple of weeks off because honestly, I'm more effective alive than dead. So why don't we put a pin in it and we'll circle back in 4 weeks, right? He could just stop praying. Second thing he could have done, and quite frankly, it's probably what I would have done, he could fake pray, right? Give him the old fake job. Pray with your eyes open. Kind of one of these kind of things, right? You praying? No. What are you doing? It's just, why would you, okay? He could fake pray. Or lastly, he could decide to risk death and remain faithful. And this is what the enemy was hoping he would do. And this right here is what he was willing to do because his faith in God was so strong. So let's watch this play out in real time. Verse 10. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. As soon as Daniel learned about this no prayer decree, what did he do? He went right home and he prayed, which means our first response to trouble should always be prayer. When we are met with opposition or hardship or bad news or trials or whatever, the first thing we should do if we want to stand strong is to pray. But let's be honest, because we're all friends here, right? For as much as we want to give this slide right here, the old CMA, the old Christian moan of affirmation, that's a good one, right? Take a picture of it. Look at that later. Isn't it true, unfortunately, that the first thing we usually do when we're in trouble is panic? I'm guilty of that. Now, I don't know if that's just human instinct, right? If that's just part of our fight or flight. But when we face some obstacle or trial, isn't it true that we sort of immediately look to ourselves and our own strength as to how we're going to handle this? And so we're going to do everything we can do to fix this. And we do everything we know how to do, and we do everything in our power. And when we can't do anything more, when we've exhausted all of our options, what do we say? Well, all we can do now is pray. Now, I understand that at some level, this right here is just a saying, right? It's kind of like, well, all we can do now is okay. I think there's some truth to it, though. I think our words betray us and show, quite frankly, how little value we sometimes place in prayer. But Daniel's showing us that when things get hard, when trouble strikes, prayer is not the last thing you do. It is the first thing you do. And it shouldn't be, well, all we can do now is pray. It should be, hey, we can pray. We get to pray, right? We have the ability to call on the God of the universe who holds everything in the palm of his hands. Why should that be our reaction? Scripture says of God, you listen to the longings of those who suffer. You offer them hope. You pay attention to their cries for help. We serve a God, Scripture says, who listens to our prayer, who pays attention to our needs, who delights in moving on our behalf. So no, prayer is not the last thing we do. It's the very first thing we do. So Daniel prays. It says 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. I want you to pay attention to this phrase right here, just as he'd done before. You know what that tells me? That tells me that this threat of death, this opposition that he was now facing, had no effect on him. He just kept on keeping on. He just kept doing what he had always done, just as he had done before. Again, and I am so convinced, we saw this in week 1, that the reason that Daniel has had so much spiritual success is because of the predetermined resolutions he made. Remember we talked about this if you were here? Week 1, he predetermined to never eat that food that was sacrificed to other gods. And when that temptation struck, he was able to withstand it. And I am sure somewhere along the way, Daniel made a predetermined resolution that he was going to pray 3 times a day. I'm sure way more than that, but 3 times a day at least, no matter what. I'm going to pray in the morning. I'm going to pray at noon. I'm going to pray at night. I need to hear my Lord's voice. I need his guidance. I need his strength. And Daniel's predetermined resolution to cultivate this relationship with God is ultimately what brought him through this and set him up for spiritual success. So he prays. It says, then the officials went together to Daniel's house, and they found him praying and asking for God's help. And so they went straight to the king and reminded him about his law. Hey, just letting you know, king, that Daniel, your little superstar over there, he's ignoring your law. He's praying to his God. 3 times, by the way, with the windows wide open. Hearing this, the king was deeply troubled. Why was he deeply troubled? He was not troubled because he was mad at Daniel. He was troubled because he liked Daniel. Everybody liked Daniel, except for these guys who were jealous of him. He's angry because he knows now that he's been tricked. They pulled a fast one on him. These guys set Daniel up to fail. And so the king is angry because he feels betrayed, and he's concerned for Daniel. It actually says that he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. Another translation says he made every effort until sundown to save Daniel. But what I didn't tell you earlier is that these administrators really did trick him. They knew that Darius loves Daniel, and they knew that when Daniel got caught, which he would, they knew that Darius would try to save him. And so in appealing to his pride earlier, they had him create this law in such a way that it would be irrevocable. He couldn't get rid of it. He couldn't override it. And so Darius realizes he's been defeated, and he's angry. He realizes his hands are tied, and Daniel is stuck. So at last, the king gave orders for Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions. The king said to him, may your God, whom you serve so faithfully, rescue you. Daniel, this 80-year-old innocent man, is now deep inside that den of lions. Now, we don't know exactly what happened down there. Scripture does not talk about it. But we do know what didn't happen down there. Like, we don't know if Daniel was down there praying or if he was singing worship songs or hiding behind a rock or doing all 3. But we do know that God showed up. Take a look. Very early the next morning, the king got up and hurried out to the lion's den. When he got there, he called out in anguish, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God, whom you serve so faithfully, able to rescue you from the lions? Imagine the tension in this moment, right? Imagine him just listening for a response, any signs of life, and all he's hearing are lions roaring and prowling around. Finally, Daniel answered, long live the king. My God sent his angels to shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me, for I have been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty. It says the king was overjoyed. He immediately ordered that Daniel be lifted out of the den. It says, and when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. And there you go. Daniel and the lion's den. Now, if the story ended here, it would be amazing. But it does not end here. In fact, what happens next takes this amazing story and makes it incredible. So seeing the power of Daniel's God, King Darius sends a message out to every single person in this enormous empire. And here's what he sent out. I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he will endure forever. It goes on. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his rule will never end. He rescues and saves his people. He performs miraculous signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. See, the miracle of this story is that Daniel was saved from death. But for my money, the power of this story comes from the fact that from one act of obedience, because one man chose to stand strong in the face of opposition, God's name was proclaimed across an entire pagan empire, and we are still talking about it 2,600 years later. So what's practical? What do you do with a message like this? If it's your first time at Downtown Harbor Church, every single week we put this word on the screen because we want to make sure you can leave on a Sunday and know exactly what to do with what you've heard. So here's what I know. I know that there are some of you here today or watching online right now. I know there's some of you who are struggling with your convictions. Okay? You're a Christian. I'm talking to the Christians right now. You're a Christian. And you know what God has put on your heart. Okay? You know what he's called you to do. And you're trying to stand strong. And you're trying to do the right thing. You desperately want to do the right thing. But the consequences of your convictions are concerning you. Your boss, okay? Your boss is pressuring you to do something unethical. And you really don't want to do it. But if you refuse, if you stand strong, you could lose your job. And you need your job, okay? You're a student. And your friends, they're pressuring you to do something that you know your parents would never want you involved with. But if you stand strong, you don't go with the flow, if you don't do it, you might lose your friends. Let's be honest, right now, friends are everything for you. You're a single person. And you're just trying to honor God with your body, okay? But the person you're dating is pushing you. And if you refuse, all you think is, I could be single forever. You know in your heart what the right thing to do is, but the roar of the lion is starting to scare you. And the threat of the potential consequences is starting to get a little more real. And the truth is, your convictions are starting to waver. And perhaps you find yourself even asking, is this even worth it? Let me say this. I think that reaction is completely natural. But if you are a Christian, okay, if you really trust Jesus, not just with your soul, but with your life, because let's be honest, trusting with your soul is easy. Life, you can touch that. Let me just ask you this. Are there any consequences that God can't handle? Come on, really? Do you actually believe that there is something so big in this world that God can't handle? I mean, think about this. Jesus conquered sin and death. You don't think he could handle your boss? You don't think he could handle your dating life? Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Look at the story of Daniel. He actually got thrown into those lions' dens, right? But if God has called you to do the right thing, if God has called you to stand strong and to honor him, then obey God. Leave the consequences to him. Remember, Daniel had no idea how that story was going to end. No idea. He had no clue that God was going to shut the mouths of those lions. All he knew is that God has been faithful. And so he obeyed. And he prayed. And he left the consequences to God. Same goes for us. Okay, when you do what's right, you can trust God with the results. Now, don't get me wrong here, okay? This is not me saying that everything's going to work out just as you thought. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that everything will work out exactly as God planned. Okay, listen. Do you believe that God knows what's best for you? I mean, if the answer is yes, then obey him. Do you believe that God knows what you need better than you know what you need? If the answer is yes, then obey him and stop worrying about the consequences. Stand strong and leave the consequences to him. Let me pray for you.